Right, good morning everybody and welcome back to the reconvened hearing on the Rawhiti domain issues. And I'd just like to welcome you all back, and also for anyone who's joining us live stream who wasn't here for the meeting a couple of weeks ago, welcome. With me I have Councillor Major on my right from the Burwood Ward, and Councillor Daniels from the Coastal Ward on the panel, and I'm Pauline Cotter from Innes Ward. We've got Derek Rusin, who's a Senior Network Planner on Zooming in. We have Tessa Zant, the Consultation Leader, here in person. Robert O'Connor, welcome for any legal advice that we might need. And Megan and Jackie over here supporting us. So, look, we're here today to reconvene the meeting to make a recommendation on the Archery Club's application for a new ground lease for their existing club rooms, and whether that lease may be extended to make room for their new proposed 307 square metre extension from an indoor archery facility, a recommendation on removal of trees required to enable this extension, and we'll also be making a recommendation on their request for the use of the car park. In the consultation document, this was actually called a licence to occupy, but we're now informed that we should treat this area of the car park as another lease to make it possible to place conditions on occupation. And I might ask Robert to expand on that in a minute, just so that we're really clear. And we heard from Bill Skews, who spoke on behalf of the Archery Club with a very good submission, leaving me in no doubt of the club's historical relationships with the park since 1992 and the success of the club, citing growing membership and the events held that attract competitors from all over New Zealand and occasionally even from offshore. So thank you everyone who submitted, and we had heard those in our last meeting 2 weeks ago. We've also read all the written submissions and they've been valuable as well. So look, without further ado, I think we'll move on, and I'm going to, first of all, I'll ask the first question of Robert just to expand on that that advice that we now treat the licence to occupy the car park as a lease, if we're addressing that. So if you could just fill us in on that, please, Robert.
Just to be consistent with the Reserves Act provisions, the relevant section in the Reserves Act contemplates the granting of a lease. Whether it's a licence or a lease in terms of the consultation material, I think is immaterial, but just in terms of when we document the lease and when we formally make recommendations and adopt those recommendations, I think we should refer correctly to a lease. I see from some of the written material that I've been given that there's some question around the car park. It appears, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears that the car park is only to be used part of the time by Archery on presumably previously agreed or identified days or periods of time.
Yeah, that's correct.
That can be accommodated within a lease quite easily. It's just a matter of those periods of use being specified, and of course outside those specified periods then the lease effectively wouldn't apply, and the car park would be available to the general members of the public. Have I covered the questions?
Yep, thank you. So you're saying it's easier to accommodate that specified occasional exclusive use when it's a lease rather than a licence to occupy?
Well, a lease is the instrument that the Reserves Act contemplates, so that's the instrument we should use, and it's easy within that instrument to specify those periods.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And there's no issue on the fact that we used a different terminology in the consultation?
No, as I alluded earlier, I think that's immaterial. I mean, the type of instrument is a minor detail matter. The substance of what's being consulted on is whether you're going to allow this use to proceed or not. The instrument is just how we implement it. So I think it's immaterial.
Right, that makes sense. Okay. And well, since I'm asking questions, I'll just carry on. I've got a question for, it might be for Derek here, and it's in the Archery Club's submission on page 26, and he's Bill's saying that they're appealing to the council on the following issues surrounding and the third bullet point is our sole use car parking as we have had for 30 years. So it's a little bit of a grey area where he's saying, I interpret that as saying that they've had sole use of the car park for 30 years. Some of the submitters have told us that the car park has been locked and kept as exclusive, and yet other advice we're hearing is that it's not exclusive. So can you clarify that, please?
Yes, I'll try to. There was a break of my communications, but what I understand your question is in relation to the history of the exclusivity of the park. What I understand, it's been a lot of different interpretation around the access to the car park, because it was originally required of the club to have it installed when they were doing the extensions of the building. So there was an expectation of exclusivity of use, but there has been a lot of expectation of other park users to be able to access it. Partly why we're going through this process now is to clarify and resolve the situation, to allow the club to be able to use the car park. Exclusivity for particular times has been indicated in the attachment to the report. But also to allow outside those times for the public to have access to it.
Yep.
That is the reason why the gate is, it was originally locked to stop accessing and lighting the facility. But the intention now is that that gate, and as I understand it, is not locked and is not meant to be locked at the present time.
Hello, this is Megan speaking. Sorry to interrupt, but Derek, we're finding it very difficult to understand you. So what I suggest, if you don't mind, is we're going to turn your audio off and I will phone your cell phone in, and you can keep your camera on. We will talk to you via your cell. So if you can turn your microphone off, and I'll call you in just a moment.
Right. So I think Derek was actually just pretty much addressed going the way we can go forward. And just one more. Are we ready to go, Megan?
No, sorry, one moment, sorry.
Yep.
No, I want to get to what he was saying was that...
What he was saying, I heard, was that because of the issues they've had with fly tipping and vandalism in there, I think the gate has inadvertently remained locked. But they don't officially have exclusive use rights, but I think that's the way it's ended up. But now with addressing a lease, we have the opportunity to address that and make further changes. I think we'll just leave it there. I think we've got the gist of it. We don't want to go back over old ground. So are you ringing him? Would it help?
Can we adjourn for 5 minutes, please?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for waiting.
Okay. We'll adjourn for 5 minutes till we get the technicalities sorted out. I think we can hear you better now, Derek. Thank you.
Sorry, I just have an ordinary cell. I don't have a smartphone, so that doesn't work.
That's okay. That's better. So thanks for the answer to that question. Now, the next question, are you ready? There's still confusion over the building. Who actually owns the existing building? Are they asking for a lease for the building or the land that it's sitting on because they own the building, or does the council own the building still? Because I know it came from the camping ground originally.
I understand that the building is under the ownership of the club. They inherited it when they, or purchased it when they arrived on the location and entered into a ground lease for the land under the building. Yes, so the lease they currently have is just for the footprint of the building. The proposed lease is for the existing building and for the extension. That extended building obviously will be in the ownership of the club. So that is the usual situation with occupations on parks. The club's own facilities, the building usually,
Yep.
and they hold the ground lease for the area.
Yep, thank you, Derek. That explains it. So somehow they've purchased the building and they're leasing an area of the park to site it on. Right, so those are my questions. I'm going to throw to James. Have you got any questions that you'd like to put to staff? Or?
Kia ora, just further to Derek, your comment there about the buildings, and I'm not sure whether it's on your radar or your responsibility, but so if the lease wasn't renewed, what would happen to the building? Can someone tell me?
In that event, the building obviously is still in the ownership of the owner of the building, but if they don't have a ground lease for that building, they are then in the position, obviously they're not able to occupy the site on the park. They have the option to remove the building or for the council to take over the ownership of that building. Now, obviously this building, being on a concrete pad, won't be able to be removed. And in general, the council's not in a position to budget for the acquisition of buildings that are being vacated. It is an issue that occurs in other locations, and an example would be the old scout dens in various parks around the city. The scouts vacated and they were required, or they needed to leave the buildings behind that were then taken over as an asset by the council.
So budget's not an issue. That's what you're saying. If with the scout halls, that they just reverted to council ownership or became council assets, they didn't pay for it. Is that what you were saying?
It all comes down to negotiation, because obviously the owner of the building, well, firstly, if the site is to be leased to another party, that other party, if they obtain the lease, they can negotiate with the current building owners to purchase the building. In the event that there's no lease granted for an occupation of the site, yes, there would be negotiation between the council and the departing leasee in terms of potential acquisition of the building, but there is no guarantee, and it depends on council funding, whether or not council chooses to enter into a purchase of the building. Yes, it depends on every case, and it depends on if the situation arises.
Yeah, but if using the scout halls as an exemplar or an example, at least, then there's no actual need for council to have funding to buy it. If the lease expires, then the building would naturally just fall back into council's hands. Wouldn't have to pay for it. would it?
Can I just interrupt here? I think it might be a question for Robert here. Robert, do you have a...
Derek's generally correct. I think it'll depend on the terms of the lease. Most, and I haven't seen this particular lease, but generically these leases make provision, as Derek has described, that either there'll be a negotiation on ownership of the building. Ultimately, if that falls down, then the building may be required to be removed at the cost of the tenant. Of course, when you're dealing with sports clubs or community groups, the funding of those demolition works becomes an issue. In terms of negotiating for the building, it may well be that the council might say that if you want to keep the building, we'll keep it, but we won't pay you anything, and that'll save you the demolition cost. That may be the outcome, but generally the outcome would be negotiated, as Derek said.
Okay, right, thanks. Right, the issue of the lease as against the licence to occupy, I understand that and why it would have to go there. I couldn't hear earlier on when you were speaking, Derek, but did you say that gate would not be locked anymore then? Notwithstanding that they are going to have a lease and for specified dates they'll have exclusive use, but in general, outside of those dates, the gate would be removed, basically. I'm not sure who I asked that question of.
Yes, I can. Well, generally the gate, with some other parks that you have gates that are locked during nighttime hours for security reasons. As I said, there may be circumstances where the gate does need to be locked. It's under the auspices and control of the parks operations team. Certainly during the day, when the car park isn't being exclusively used by the club, the gate should be open and unlocked.
Yeah, it's just that they're not. They're not now, and they haven't been for a long, long time. And it was during the hearing, when people were submitting, it was submitted that the council are the ones that control it, but that's not my understanding. So, I would be more supportive if there was an undertaking that the gate goes, because that's been a real issue with submitters and people, residents' comments.
That's fine, James. We have the power. We have the ability to recommend that in our recommendation to the community board.
Right. Then the next thing is about consultation. I need to table it. That I don't believe the consultation was wide enough or appropriate. There was the southwestern corner of the park, Lonsdale Street and Keys Road, I presume. But along Lonsdale Street, all the way along Lonsdale Street, they have a real connection with the domain, or park or domain. And I've had a number of residents raise it with me. They didn't know until they heard by word of mouth. And, one of them is happy to be named Alan Coburn, very well-known, long-time resident of the area. And he didn't know at all. And another one is Keith Mackay, who wanted to be named for this. He didn't know. And so I'm concerned that I don't think we went broad enough in that sense. And I'm not sure if there is anything that can be done about that.
The letter drop for the consultation was discussed specifically with the community board, and everyone on the community board agreed on the day with that letter drop. The reason why it was as limited as it was, because it's an area park, so it's more than just the immediate neighbours who use it, it's the entire suburb, I would say. So how far you letter drop is, where do you stop? So the decision was made to letter drop the most affected residents, those who would visually or audibly be affected by the decision. And then there was a huge number of people who had previously submitted on other consultations about the domain in recent years. was it the tree planting? Something, yeah. So we had a stakeholder database that was really extensive. It was posted on social media and had good uptake as well.
Okay,
Can
thanks,
I add,
Cecil.
may I add a comment as well?
Yep.
In terms of the Reserves Act, the Reserves Act formal requirements of giving notice of these types of proposal don't require letter drops. They simply require public notices.
And, yeah. Thank you. I think we did ask these questions last time too, but
Okay, no, that's fine.
is that it for you?
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Major, do you have any question?
Yeah, I'd just like to I'm sort of thinking that when these guys went from Burwood Park, where they were 25, 30 years ago, to here, things have changed a hell of a lot. There seems to be a lot more casual people walking around. There's the athletics, there's different things happening with rockabilly and things like that. And I just wonder if these guys have... I've done a wee bit of homework with the reserves people, Parks and Reserves, about any other pieces of land that might be more... that it'd be better so that it's more exclusive for these guys, because they're passionate about what they do. It causes a bit of angst with, oh, it's our car park, it's their car park, everyone gets a wee bit toey. If we could perhaps work hard with them or get them to talk to reserves to find a bit that could be exclusively theirs, which is on good ground that they can build their new building on, or maybe it's got a scout there next to it which we can give them, or whatever. I know a couple of places, but they've got to go and find their own thing by dealing with the reserves. But I just think it's starting to get a bit busy down here, and it might not be conducive for what we're after. So I think they should perhaps look a wee bit further afield, and parks should work with them to try and solve the perhaps perceived problem that I'm thinking is there.
So is that a question for Derek, that he's thinking there may be other areas around Christchurch that could be suitable, whether it's a lot of submitters... Turn my microphone on, sorry Derek. A lot of submitters did mention the large amount of red zone land that we have, and there's other parks and reserves that council own. Do you think it will be possible that council could maybe identify some other sites that might be more appropriate?
So is that a question to me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't hear part of that. The answer to that is that once I started in being involved in this process, it was a year ago now, we asked those questions with the club about other options, considerations for moving potentially to other sites, and the conclusion of those discussions was that no, it was their preference, and the only viable option was then to continue on their current location, which I need to point out they do have the right to occupy that for another year, with their lease not expiring until next year.
Yep.
So those were questions certainly that were well and truly discussed.
You know, Derek, I think that we're coming at it from the other angle, that perhaps with Councillor Majors wanting to know that in the event that their lease was not renewed, are there other locations that could be found for this activity? And all the red zone areas and all the parks and reserves that council own, any option in there, would there be any other options for them to go to?
Well, the answer to that is the answer every situation where there is an organisation, a sports organisation is wishing to find land to be able to undertake their activity. And in the future, there may be. And at this present time, I'm not aware, and the club isn't in a position of being able to go to any other location. But if they weren't able to continue beyond next year at this location, then we would need to work with them and look at all the options for other sites, such as has been mentioned in the red zoned areas. So those were raised last year and were discussed at great level.
Thank you. Thank you. help?
I looked, sorry, I've got one I forgot to
Yep.
add, I couldn't remember what.
Yep.
No. I'm not sure who this would be directed at, but I presume it's you, Derek, because you're overseeing the application or the issue. In the Rawhiti Domain Management Plan of 2007, there's an extension to that building, which is actually on a different footprint. It juts out onto the shooting area rather than the other way around. Are you familiar with that?
If you're referring to the management plan and the landscape plan that showed the area that was contemplated for future placement of a new building, which we're currently involved in, that area corresponds to the current area that has been proposed for the extended lease. So it's not a different area. It is as close as possible to that area that was indicated in the management plan.
Yeah, no, well, it's a slightly different footprint, to be frank. But my question is, why wasn't that progressed? That was 2007, and I can imagine that the earthquakes of 2010 and 2011 would have had an impact. But did you ask them where that had gone to, or had they progressed it between 2007 and late 2010?
Yes, I know the history, and the history will take probably 2 hours to go through it all. There's a whole, you mentioned one of them, earthquakes. There were the need to provide more detailed information. You're right, possibly, strictly it's not exactly the same location, but the time between 2007 and now, there were a lot of factors why it didn't proceed. Sorry for that. So the situation now is, last year was the earliest opportunity for the matter to be proceeded to the point that we are now.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
And Robert, I've got another question. Have you got the consultation document in front of you there? Okay. I have I'll keep this for the panel discussion, I think. All right, so we're done with our questions? Mm-hmm. All right, so I think that out of the many submitters that we had, most of the other group users were okay with this application, but it was the individual park users that I found were very concerned about this activity. And what came out of the submissions to me, and I think the other panellists will probably agree with this too, was that the perception of safety is very real. That people, and I know this hasn't been any incidents, but people do not feel safe with this activity, and partly because people say that the use of the park is increasing, and the membership of the Archery Club is also increasing, and I just feel that that is a big issue, the safety. I'm also concerned about the size and scale of what is termed as an extension of an existing building, and the picture in the consultation document is very misleading in my view, because it makes the existing building look very flash, and the extension actually looks smaller than the existing building. And in actual fact, we've made 2 site visits out there now, one before the hearing and one after. The existing building is a tiny little cottage of a thing, and the extension is really, really impressively large and dominant, and it has a mezzanine floor in it, so it's quite high. Now, in 4.1 of the reserves, yes, it's a good, well, it's wider by 25%ish, or and it's longer by about a third, and it's probably a lot higher. And I wonder if people had been more aware of the proportional increase of that footprint in the ground. And I know that the the management plan does refer to it, but only the 307 square metres size of the building, not the actual form of it. And in 4.1, it states that in the domain, a high level of open space character is to be retained, which is not dominated by buildings. And I think this actually is very contrary to that vision, personally, and that's my concern. And I think that's why we have been asking questions about could this group be assisted on a journey to find a more appropriate site to continue both their outdoor and their indoor activity. And then there's another issue that they could then collaborate with another group, for instance, rifle shooting, and collaborate and join up with a whole new activity which is in a more suitable location. So there's the perception of safety, there's the size and scale of this, and then of course so many of the submitters commented on the loss of trees, including the progressive historical loss of trees and the lack of forward planning, maintenance and planting. And I think that it would be a very bold move to take out any more trees, particularly since the monarch butterflies seem to have virtually disappeared from here now, and it was one of the key areas that they wintered over. So the loss of trees came out very loud and very clear. And there was also the fact that most of the other users tend to collaborate and get along, and it came through a lot in this hearing from the submissions that this group wasn't particularly inclusive. And I just want to point out a couple of lines here in their submission, which I found very disconcerting, and it says, we appeal to the council that enough is enough, and this is from the Archery Club. Enough is enough, as we have indulged your every impulse at our cost. It's time to decide on the following and issues surrounding the lease for the club, our new extension and the problem with the trees, and our sole use car parking as we have had for 30 years. So that to me indicates a kind of a tone that has come through from the submitters about a relationship issue here. Now I know these things can be solved going forward once they've been raised, but it does seem to me that it might be an opportune time to actually help these guys to move to a more exclusive area, as you said, Phil. I think it needs to be in an exclusive area. So that's where I'm kind of coming from. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if these guys are passionate about what they do, if they have an exclusive area of their own, they can put a fence around it, and that's theirs, and they can do what they like. And there is, I'm sure, there's plenty of land in the red zone or thereabouts that can be done for them.
Could be an opportunity, and that also came through the submissions that this activity should be fenced.
Yes.
James.
Look, the people that didn't get to submit, they were along the lines of what how you've just described those other submissions. So they would have been quite strong in their submission along those lines. The thing that I look at is, they went in there, I thought it was in 1992. I've seen some documentation that said 1992, but someone's been talking about 25 years. But anyway, it's almost 30 years since they've been there. I remember when they were in Burwood Park and when they transferred. My first father-in-law was a member. But things have changed in the last 30 years, massively changed. The use of that domain has ramped up. The other thing is that if this was a new application, would we consider archery an appropriate activity in that park as of today? And now we're essentially at the time when we can reconsider that. And I point to the only bigger park than this in the city, to Hagley Park. If it was being proposed for there, would that happen?
And I think that's a question that I think we know the answer to.
It's a rhetorical question.
Yeah. So as Derek rightly pointed out, the lease has another year to run. A little it's June, wasn't it? So 13 months. So, and of course, to relocate takes time. So I think that it would be appropriate to recommend that we grant a new lease, but for a much shorter term. And so I know that parks leases are historically 3 lots of 11, but they can be anything. I mean, in this document, quite a few of them are on a year-by-year. So, Robert, what's your advice? If it was a year-by-year lease, so it would be from June 21, a year-by-year, how would that work, or would it be better for us to grant it more of in a chunk, like a 2-year with a 1-year renewal or something like that?
Well, they have a year to run.
Yes.
Do you think that's not long enough to find an alternative site?
No, it's not long enough, in my
Don't
view.
want to put pressure on.
Under the lease, if they remain in the legal position is if they remain in occupation beyond the expiry of the lease, then they, with the consent of the owner, then the lease holds over on a month-to-month basis.
Yes, you could do that, but then that's a little bit unsettling for them as well, I think.
No, it would be by agreement, wouldn't it, month to month? And it would be, that would give them as many months as they need to do it.
Potentially, yes. I mean, the council as a landlord is not in the position or wouldn't adopt the same sort of approach as a commercial landlord and come down hard, I would have thought.
So that would require no more documentation.
And no decision from you today. And no consultation, no. So
how can it be, I don't want to use the word, how can it be, I don't want to particularly use the word, but terminated, I think it's a technical term, but how would it come to an end then?
An end date.
Yeah.
it would need to be cancelled as the correct term by either party.
Right.
And if it rolls over on a periodic basis, month to month, then it would be 1 month's notice.
Right. Okay. And then we've got some responsibility as both the owner and as the council to act responsibly. We're not going to give them 1 month, literally 1 month's notice. Oh. Who makes that decision, by the way?
To cancel a lease, I don't think there are any staff delegations to cancel leases, so I think that would... I'd need to look at the delegations register, but I suspect it would be the community board. I suspect.
Well, the community board has delegation over this. We're making a recommendation to the community board. So
I'm just, in my mind, thinking of what the delegations say.
Yeah.
It may, I just flag, it may not even be the community board, it may require council.
Yeah.
But it would be elected members, not staff.
And at least it's not someone deciding one day, no, I've had enough. So it'll be, at a reasonable level of delegation. So that is a good way forward if we don't have to do anything more than just let it go to a periodic, monthly.
Well, your remit is to either approve this lease or not. The not option is as we've described. I mean, they still have 13 months to deal. That's quite a long period of time.
But also, we could approve a new lease for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years.
Well, I think you might get into issues around the consultation, because I presume the proposal's gone out for a fixed period of how many? 11 plus 11 plus 11 or something like that.
Yeah.
So that sort of decision would be at odds or would be different from what had been consulted upon.
All right, so if we want to comply with what was consulted on and we're wanting the Archery Club to find a new location, our best option is to just simply decline the renewal of the lease.
I believe so, and the comfort they have is they have another 13 months, and
then it goes to a month.
And then it would go onto a periodic basis, and that would require another decision to cancel.
Great. Yeah. No. Okay. That's elegant.
Okay. No, that's right. And we can put that in our notes, in our report, that the intention is not to boot them out after 13 months, but actually to walk alongside them and help them to find a better spot. It's exclusive, it's safer, and it's more appropriate.
I think it would be better to say that you don't need to refer to not booting them out in 13 months. I think you just refer that there's a 13-month window of opportunity to look for alternatives, and note that further decisions would be required down the track if the lease was to be terminated or cancelled past that point.
Yes, well, I wasn't going to actually put it like booting them out there, but I think, but you, as Phil said, you were very eloquent. Yes, a 13-month window of opportunity to look for other locations is really well put. But it's a 13-month plus, really, in all reality. So, all right, so are you comfortable with that way forward?
Yeah, no, that's...
All right. So the decision that we're making today is that someone trying to speak? No. Is we are declining the application of the Christchurch Archery Club for the renewal of their lease in Rawhiti domain. All those in favour, say aye.
Sorry, just one moment before we do that.
Yep.
Sorry. Is that the actual wording that you're wanting? That's the hearings panel recommends to the community board that it's declining the application. Declining the application.
Yes.
For the lease renewal.
The application from the Christchurch Archery Club.
Sorry, for what's the archery?
Christchurch Archery Club. Yes. Oh, sorry, yes. Here we go. So a new lease, not a lease renewal.
So declining the application for a new lease
Thanks, Tessa.
and take out renewal. Yes.
At Rawhiti domain. So can we put a note under that?
Yes, so do a full stop and then do a return, but then go back and yeah, just go
Yeah.
Can we note?
The current lease expires in June 2021. And Robert, then after which time it goes to a roll to. What's the wording? It goes to a month by month.
Yes, I would like to check that.
Is your microphone on? Can you record?
Derek, are you still there?
Yes.
Derek?
Can someone tell him please that we can't hear him?
Oh, Derek, we can't hear you.
No.
So are you checking if it does in fact go to a month by month?
I'd like to check that.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm going to phone this now.
And a friend. And so in the final report from the panel, we'll have opportunity to note a few more things.
Okay.
But I'm wondering if we should also note, no, we'll do it in the report for the community board to advocate for, yeah, rather than, yeah.
Well, Robert.
I'm about to put you on speakerphone in front of the microphone and wait that this works. So hold on, just 1 minute.
Did he hear the question?
Ask me a question. What's your question, sorry?
Derek, can you hear me?
I might need to relay it. So if you tell me, I'll tell him.
Does he have a copy of the lease in front of him?
I can hear now.
Okay, do you have a copy of the lease in front of you?
Not immediately to hand. So the nature of the question is...
I just want to know if there's there'll be a clause in the lease. It depends on the age of the lease. If it's an ancient lease, it may not be easy to find, but I'm looking for a clause with a heading called holding over.
So I can't hear...
He's looking for a clause with a heading of holding over.
But the lease may be an old document which may not have headings, and it may not be easy for him to find.
You don't actually have the lease there though, Derek?
No, I don't have the actual deed of lease
Yeah,
just to hand.
Well, look if we can. We'll see if we can find it on Trim quickly.
Yes, we don't want to leave them in the lurch.
Okay, we're just going to adjourn for 5 minutes and back at 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Thank you, Megan. We're resuming the meeting again. Apologies for that. So after which time the occupation will revert to monthly tenancy.
It should be revert.
Sorry, Pauline, when you've got the wording correct, for the clarity of people who can't see, could you read the whole thing?
Yes, I will. Yep. Right. Is occupancy the right word in there? Is okay? Yeah. So is there anything else we want to note in there that we think... Okay, all right, so what we've got now, we have the resolution here from the panel today that the hearings panel recommends that the Waitai Coastal Burwood Community Board resolves to decline the application for a new lease for the Christchurch Archery Club at Rawhiti Domain, noting the current lease expires in June 2021, after which time the occupation reverts to a monthly tenancy. I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Oh, Phil just beat you to it, James. All those in favour? I'm sorry, did you want anything to speak to that? Anything to say, James? No. But I want to thank everybody involved in this anyway today, and it's been, we've given this long and careful consideration. I think having the 2 weeks between when we heard the submissions and asked people questions on this, we've been out again to the site, as I said, and I think that harder it is to see a very successful and beneficial activity like this have to face the challenge now of finding a site. That is difficult, but I think in the long run this is going to be better for everybody. It's going to preserve relationships at the park. They'll find a better location that does not have safety issues, and that came through loud and clear from our submitters, that the community does not feel safe with this activity, and I can understand that. And also noting that this panel is sure that if the community board upholds our decision, that they will advocate and walk alongside this group with City Council to help them find a better site for a better future. Mm-hmm. So thank you everybody for everything that you've done on this hearing, and I'll hand it over to the community board for the next stage. So thanks panellists. It's been good. Meeting closed.